Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Gina Coker, I'm your organizer. Please use me if you have any questions, go ahead and reach out. You are all muted, of course, I'm sure you know the rules by now. If you have questions, please use the chat function at the bottom of your control panel, and we will get to those questions at the end of the webinar. I am going to introduce, in the meantime, Carrie Bannigan, who will kick us off. Thanks again, folks.
Thank you, Dina. Welcome everybody to today's webinar, Action Towards Climate Change, sponsored by Lensing and presented in celebration of Climate Week NYC. With the heightened awareness that carbon emissions are a rapidly growing global problem, which has tremendous impact on the environment, how are we going to work to change this issue? Increasing carbon emissions cause far-ranging damage, from rising temperatures to weather pattern shifts to food and water scarcity. Many in the apparel and footwear industry, such as those experts on our panel today, recognize their company's role and the industry's responsibility for leading a zero carbon transformation and collaboration for Sustainable Development Goal 13, climate action. Before we start our panel discussion, we would like to welcome opening remarks from Anne-Marie Hugh, Acting Executive Director of the United Nations Office for Partnerships.
Good morning. It's really my pleasure to join Carrie in welcoming you to this webinar, Action Toward Climate Change. The event is part of the New York Climate Week, organized by the Climate Group, and my name is Anne-Marie, and as mentioned, I am the Acting Executive Director of the United Nations Office for Partnerships. We're really here to be your gateway to the UN. We want to connect, co-create the solutions the world needs to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, our roadmap to peace, dignity, and equality on a healthy planet. We work with businesses, philanthropies, academia, and advocates, and so many more to address the key challenges that we face today. From our office, we welcome the work of the Climate Group to accelerate climate action to achieve a world of no more than 1.5 degrees of global warming. Climate Week brings together strong global voices from the public and private sectors, and I'm especially interested in innovations that can help us supercharge solutions and scale them so we can reach everyone, everywhere. And that's something I've really been stressing this week. Those solutions, they really need to reach people everywhere and at the same time. In our interconnected world, we can't afford a lag in access. We are lucky to collaborate with many sectors. The fashion industry is an important partner in our ambition to reach the global goals, from sourcing materials and creating a diverse work environment to producing sustainable products. Decarbonization is a major topic for the industry today. Important progress has been achieved so far, such as the Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action and the Fashion Pact, drawing on the methodologies from the Science-Based Targets Initiative. Earlier this month, the Secretary General launched the United in Science 2020 report, which presents the latest climate-related trends. While economies are slowing down because of COVID-19, the heating of our planet has not let up. As the report shows, greenhouse gas concentrations reached new record highs in 2020. Consistent solutions to reducing emissions need to be found and put in place. We need new technologies, and we need to reset our consumption patterns at all levels across all sectors. As the science sets out clearly, we must decarbonize the global economy by 2050, and at the very latest, and that shift has already started. For example, more and more we are seeing consumers move towards sustainable and carbon-neutral products and services. Investors are shifting from carbon-intensive portfolios to greener and socially responsible investments. Today, younger people are the largest consumer demographic in the modern economic history, and overwhelmingly, younger people want clean, green, blue, and responsible products. Governments, of course, have an essential role. This is particularly true as they mobilize trillions in tax dollar funds for COVID recovery measures. Decisions they make today can either drive forward climate action and get us on track to meet the 1.5 target, or set us back years, something we can't afford. That's why the Secretary General has urged governments to take 6 climate-positive actions to recover better together and drive progress toward the SDGs. Number one, invest in green jobs. Two, do not bail out polluting industries. End fossil fuel subsidies. Take climate risks into account in all financial and policy decisions. Let's work together. And number six, most importantly, leave no one behind. While these calls to action are aimed primarily at governments, businesses are a big part of the solution. And that's really a great segue to the panel gathered today. I'd like to recognize Lensing for their leadership and collaboration to achieve the global goals, and particularly their investments in reducing CO2 emissions. My special thanks to Tricia Carey for curating the event today and for being such a strong voice advocating the SDGs within the industry. I'd also like to acknowledge our moderator, Carrie Bannigan, for driving change in the fashion industry through the dynamic and inclusive Conscious Fashion campaign. And we have with us leading experts from the industry, Florian Lewis and Jad. I might own a few pairs of sustainably woolly shoes. You are all trailblazers. We have an exciting conversation ahead, and I wish you a great event.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Our panel today will share with you their perspectives on decarbonizing the panel industry and the initiatives that their companies are undertaking. To echo Anne-Marie's reference to our panelists, we have today with us Florian Hubrandner, VP of Business Management Textiles of Lensing, Lewis Perkins, Executive Director of the Apparel Impact Institute, and Jad Fink, VP of Innovation and Sustainability at Allbirds. Now, before we dive into the questions, I think it would be great if you could each introduce yourselves and more so your role, starting with you, Jad.
Great. Well, thank you for having me today. This is an exciting opportunity to join this panel and a very important topic, something very near and dear to Allbirds' heart. So yes, I'm Jad Fink, and I have the privilege of leading innovation and sustainability at Allbirds. We are a lifestyle brand that is just celebrated our 4th year anniversary. And we were started with a simple mission to make better things in a better way. And we're proud to have been partnering with Lensing for several years now, most specifically on our tree line, which has become a major part of our business. And there's a lot more in store there. In my role, I get to look for, partner with, help develop and deploy the most novel sustainable materials out there and find ways to continue to delight our customers with them, because we think if you can really nail comfort, design, sustainability, and performance all together, then people really will show up. They do want those things to be brought together in a great product. And so that was our hunch when we started, and it's proven out really well. So we get to the innovation side of the team is really hunting for all those great materials and deploying them into our products, and the sustainability side, making sure we do all the math to line up, check the numbers, check the carbon. And so that's going to be a lot of what we're talking about today. So again, great to be here. Looking forward to discussing this important topic.
Great, thank you. I'm really looking forward to diving in deeper into this discussion with you. Lewis?
Yes, you all can hear me all right?
Yeah.
Great. So sorry that my camera is not working, unfortunately, but I think that is part of our realities as we're all learning how to be in conferences virtually. But thank you again for inviting me to join today. My organization, the Apparel Impact Institute, was founded by the industry as a need to help align programming to scale key targets related to climate, water, chemistry, impact of materials, biodiversity, et cetera. And our first real focus is around scaling improvements within the supply chain of the apparel sector. We know that there are certain disruptions or interventions that need to occur or can occur in either to lower the carbon of the industry, particularly as we look at scope 3, the supply chain. And so we're working in alignment with the Science Based Targets Initiative, and we work with companies to take their data, we aggregate that data around where carbon impacts are, we look at certain tools like the Higg Index to give us insights, and from those data insights, we're able to identify the hotspots in the supply chain where key emissions need to be reduced, and then we identify programming, we fund programming, and then we scale and measure that programming in collective action with the industry. So quite simply, it's around defragmenting the multitude of programs and initiatives that might be out there by bringing them together into a programmatic roadmap so that a manufacturer and supplier, in partnership with the brands and retailers they supply, are able to see which key programs exist and can be scaled in order to reach their science-based targets commitments to lower CO2 and increase renewables.
Fantastic. That is a very in-depth list. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Florian?
Thank you, Kurt.
Hello, this is Florian. I'm with Lenzing in the headquarters here in Austria. A great pleasure to be here with you today and discuss decarbonization of the industry. I'm actually, for a change, in the office, not at home. So I'm at the location where we produce many of our lyocell and modal fibers that many of you probably know under the Tencel brand. These are our main fibers, lyocell and modal fibers. We also use EcoVero for viscose products, but the focus today is really going to be about our decarbonization efforts around lyocell and modal plants. I'm responsible for the textile business of Lenzing, and I'm very much looking forward to today's discussion.
Thank you so much. So Chad, I'm going to kick off the discussion with you. Now, according to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 13, bold climate action could trigger at least $26 trillion in economic benefits by 2030. But what are the key climate change priorities for your company?
Well, we like to keep things very clear and simple and focused at Allbirds. And so while we track several different environmental metrics, our climate priorities, the top three, are carbon, carbon, and carbon. We've got a very clear strategy to measure, reduce, and offset. And so by measure, by doing full life cycle analyses on every product we produce, cradle to grave, full life cycle. And now we've announced earlier this year that we're quite proud to be the first footwear and apparel brand to put that carbon score on every single product we make. So it's physically now on the shoes, it's on the socks and the underwear that we have launched. So we think not only is it important to track that, but we want to put that on right in the customer's viewpoint. We want it to be as easy and as simple and as expected as nutritional facts on food. You can turn around every piece of food you buy in the grocery store and figure out the calories. You can make your own choices, but the information is right there for you. We think that should be a responsibility of everybody producing things today. So, and then reduce, the second phase of the strategy, and that's something where we try to use the lowest carbon materials possible, lowest carbon processes possible. And that's a great area where we can work with a very important partner of ours, Lenzing, we use a lot of Tencel lyocell. It's the fundamental product for our entire tree platform. Very low carbon product, amazing environmental footprint. And that's why we're excited today to be talking about their new initiatives, to continue working with our partners to keep lowering that inherent footprint down. And then the final piece being offset. We know that immediately today, it's not generally possible to get your inherent footprint down to true zero. So we look at getting to net zero, offsetting our project with verified carbon offsets, and making sure that we're not waiting until some pledge in 2040 or 2050 to reduce our overall footprint by X%. We say we think everybody should be at net zero right now, and then get back to the hard work of working with your partners to reduce your inherent footprint to zero.
Thank you. And taking on what you're saying there about reduce reduction, could you tell us a little bit about waste reduction there and water usage?
Absolutely. So one of the beautiful parts about doing the life cycle analysis, at first it was quite frankly, we were kind of catching up. You know, we started with a very small team. We took our best guesses at what would be good materials, and then we did our life cycle analysis. And we view it as kind of a report card, but it's also like a treasure map or a heat map to figure out, okay, where are the different impact areas of what we're making? And sometimes they're intuitive and sometimes they're not. And you can understand the different effects of travel, the different effect or transportation, materials, manufacturing, et cetera. And what we found out very quickly in footwear is that it's really dominated by materials and manufacturing. And so working with companies to to find those low carbon materials and to make them even better is pretty important. See if we can increase the percentage in our products going forward. But what's great is when you're using that roadmap, it also helps you figure out, wait a minute, you can't just measure what's in the final product. You have to measure the losses and the waste of making that product. You have to take kind of a tax on yourself for if you're not being very efficient with your materials, because you have to use the full amount of materials that you started with, not what you end up with. So by measuring that gross material calculation, it gives you basically a waste map to go in and start figuring out, wow, why is the yield so low on this piece of material? Can we change the shape? Can we nest it better? And we take these life cycle analyses back to our factories. It's not just something for us. And they've been fascinated to see, hey, look, this is what the score is for what we're making together. And here's how we can work together. Let's use this as a priority list so that we're not just chasing everything with the same urgency, that we can actually figure out, hey, if we solve these top 3 things, we can get 80% of the waste down. So that's that we use it not just for carbon, but also as a way to go back through the factories and figure out where are these steps kind of out of line and where could we get a lot better on waste and metrics like that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Florian, have you anything to add to this?
I think our approach is not so different from Allbirds. I think it all started with first actually creating transparency on our own CO2 footprint as a starting point. And then actually we did define science-based targets. I think was one important commitment after quite some internal discussion. We said, okay, we want to self-commit to ambitious targets, reduce our carbon footprint by 50%, the specific carbon footprint by 2030, and then eventually become zero in 2050. And then actually to really put our money where our mouth is, really develop a roadmap, a plan for all of our production sites. For the one where I'm sitting here today, that is actually very, very good when it comes to decarbonization, but also for those plants that are a bit not as far on that journey. So this whole team at Lenzing that works on that roadmap defines initiatives to substantiate this goal and make sure that they actually achieve it. So a lot of initiatives around it. The most important one clearly is reducing the need for energy in the first place. That means closing loops, recovery wherever it's possible, so reducing the energy necessities, consumption. The second one is, of course, green energy. It's easy on some parts of the world with plants, a bit more challenging in others. And then also very important, really partnering with our suppliers. Right now, for the past months and quarters, when we're also developing the product we'll talk about later today, we saw that many of our partners are actually very open to discussing decarbonization, and so are we when Allbirds approached us, or when other partners approach us. I think it's also our I think it's an interesting topic to discuss anyways. I think a lot of us people are excited about it, and it's exciting to see how we can get it further down. We're not at zero yet, unfortunately, so we need a bit of compensation, but I think we're on a very, very good track.
Thank you so much. Lewis, now over to you. In your opinion, how have consumer attitudes about apparel sustainability evolved? What must brands and retailers do to engage consumers and make sustainability a priority? Lewis, I think you're muted. Are you still with us?
I am with you. Can you hear me now? Thank you, folks.
Yes, we can.
Great question. Thank you. Great question, Carrie. And first I'll add, it's great to listen to my 2 colleagues on the panel because our approaches are so aligned in terms of the way in which we look at the hot spots within manufacturing. And I think Jad did a great job of really describing the way that Allbirds is looking at their engagement with their consumer and their customer. And I think that what we're learning now, and particularly in the last 6 months, where we see a real shift within the apparel and footwear industry as individuals are questioning their relationship to materials and products and questioning their values as it relates to the planet as a whole, and also consumption and production. So it's a critical time in which companies actually begin to tell more about the stories of the work that they're doing. And I think Allbirds is a great example of a company. Lenzing is a great example of companies that are very public about their connection to science-based targets or their relationship to decarbonization. But oftentimes that can be seen by a consumer as a little bit wonky information or a little bit too dense. And so, as Jad was describing, finding a way to make this information available and clear to the consumer so that they can actually take on their own interest around diving in deeper to maybe some of the programs or projects that the brand or the manufacturer may have embarked upon themselves. I think that's going to be more critical. But consumer, as you asked in the question, consumer attitudes are definitely shifting and have continued to shift as we look at ways in which the apparel and footwear industry is being disrupted through repair, share, keeping products in a shared economy, a circular economy as well. There's definitely a shift in which the way consumers are engaging in brands and looking for brands to share values around key issues like climate.
So true. And when we look as well as what we've all been living through with this pandemic, I think so much has been unveiled, but also allowed brands to connect with the consumers and listen and implement. So thank you so much for that. Florian, carbon footprint reduction tops many companies' priority lists. Specifically, what programs do you have in place to reduce carbon output? And are there any plans for accelerating carbon reduction?
Yeah, no, thanks, Carrie. Indeed, so we have, as I said before, we have this task force that's looking at all the sites and develops a roadmap for each site to really become carbon neutral. And but even before the crisis hit, we actually sat together as a team and said, well, what can we do to even, or would it be possible to develop a product that's really carbon neutral? Would it be possible to have a carbon neutral fiber to sort of be faster than our science-based target development to come to zero now? So we were going through all the sites and looked at their specific footprint. Eventually came up with some key initiatives and ideas that we developed now over the past quarters, all the way also through the crisis, and that allowed us to really define a product that we now call a Tencel Carbon Zero Tencel, which will be the first really carbon neutral fiber. And it's based around 3 pillars. Similar to what Jad was saying before, and then on my opening remark, it's really about, first of all, reducing the energy need as much as possible around energy efficiency, green energy. The second one is partnering with our suppliers, which we found is a very big lever. And by doing all of this, investments, green energy, partnering, we managed to get the CO2 footprint down by 65 to 80% roughly. So we are almost, we didn't get to zero all the way, but all the insetting, all the hard work at least eliminates 65 to 80% when you compare it to so conventional lyocell fibers or modal fibers. And only what's left, and it's kind of unavoidable at this point because like everybody else, we depend on scope 3 and all kinds of elements, only this small part that's left that we currently, that will compensate. And with that, where we again partner with partners similar like Allbirds, with that, we managed to go down to zero and really bring this carbon zero footprint product to the market, and very proud to launch it now in October. And again, it comes from the site I'm sitting here now and one other Austrian site.
Thank you very much. Jad, we hear from both of your co-panelists here about supply chains. How do you work with your supply chains to enact your sustainability initiatives? And could you please share with us some particular successful partnerships?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the first one that jumps to mind is obvious, and I mentioned it in the beginning of the session. But when we were looking to, so we started with a merino wool casual sneaker. That was our original launch product, still one of our major classic products. And but we said, as great of a fiber as that is, there's always going to be some part of the day or some part of the year where folks want something a little bit cooler, a little bit for warmer weather, something a little breezier. And so we did a massive search for what would be a new fiber that would be worthy to launch as a hero material for the shoe. And we zeroed in pretty quickly on Tencel lyocell. And so we worked with Lenzing for quite a while, getting ready to launch, a pretty important product for us, the big follow-up to our really popular launch shoe. and we were really excited to design the first primarily tensile lyocell casual shoe for a mainstream market. And so we launched what we call the Tree Runner. But we do a lot of great storytelling on the website to show the eucalyptus being transformed. And we, of course, refer to tensile lyocell on that website. And we're proud to know that people, put these shoes up at factories, at partners, and they say, hey, we want something like this. And so we're excited to see people follow us, because we think in the new age of sustainability leadership, if you're the only one doing something that you think is good for the planet 10, 20 years down the line, how much change have you really made? So of course, we want to keep delighting people with our versions of products, but we're excited to see a lot of people following in our footsteps, pun not intended, for the tree-based program. So that was one great partnership, gave us super low carbon tensile lyocell, super low water use tensile lyocell, and we were able to bring that out to customers. Another one was the sole of our shoes was something that we didn't have a great option for, a great solution for. It was made with traditional materials. So we had this great tensile lyocell eucalyptus-based upper. On the inside, we had a castor bean-based foam for the insole, but the outsole, the part that that cushions you when you step on the ground, was still traditional materials, synthetic materials. So we worked with a partner in Brazil to pioneer the world's first carbon negative sneaker foam from Brazilian sugarcane. And that was another 2-year project. And again, something that we were able to launch and surprise and delight folks with. And now it's on every single one of our shoes. But what's even more exciting, and I think what got it even more notice in the press, and we were able to get Time Magazine's Best Invention of 2018, was because we're sharing this with other companies. We've actively referred over 100 other major footwear and beyond companies to the partner to help make this thing a reality. It's good for the company, it's good for us, it's good for everybody. They need volume to launch new, important, sustainable products. And we're happy, we wanted to be the first, it was our idea, but we're happy to help other folks come along and see this thing deployed, see this carbon negative EVA, this sugarcane foam, what we call sweet foam, deployed around the world.
The importance of collaboration for progress.
Yeah,
thank you,
absolutely.
Jan. Lewis, could you please add comment to this?
Yes, I absolutely can. And just making sure my volume is still on, right? Great, good. Thanks everyone for the patience with technology. So as Jad is really describing the way in which they've approached innovation, it's very similar to how we see working with supply chains to do this in a collective action. So what we've been doing is really, just like Jad said, we've been identifying those key areas or hotspots by working with supply chains in cohorts. So if we have a group of brands and retailers that are aggregating funding, aggregating demand and interest around key programs, you could almost think of us as like the retailer that is pulling together all the best-in-class programs and then presenting them as a group to those manufacturers and facilities. And since the manufacturers and suppliers oftentimes are working with a multitude of these brands, being able to identify the programs that we want to deliver and signal the market to as one sort of message to the supply chain is really getting to be more critical, and particularly as we're tying it back to data-driven, science-based approaches. And so as we talk about climate in the supply chain, what we're really doing is there's 3 areas in which we're helping to aggregate these programs. The first one is maximizing the energy efficiency and bringing out programs like our Clean by Design, which do that to help lower carbon and find efficiencies within the process. And then the second one we know is to pilot programs around eliminating coal in material and production manufacturing. So developing and piloting those key programs around elimination of coal in specific areas. And then the third way is the shift to renewable energy, and really helping to do that because it's oftentimes not going to be an on-site solution as much as it is municipal or regional, and looking at how we're sort of transitioning the grid, et cetera. And so, as we're asking about how we're working with supply chains, it's really about that collective action and bringing everyone together around the metaphorical table to be working on this together as one, as opposed to a multitude of fragmented initiatives coming at the industry at once.
Thank you. Now, audience, as I move to the last question, just a reminder, if you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat box. I can see some coming in already that we'll ask shortly. But for the last question from my side, Florian, I'd love to know, knowing what you know now, what advice could you give to companies who want to start or ramp up their own Sustainable Development Goal 13 climate action projects? I saw you take a huge breath then as I asked, so I'm expecting a lot of advice here.
No, I think it's a very good question. Now, before joining Lenzing, I was a consultant, so my initial answer would be, do a lot of analysis, diagnosis, see where you stand. But I think that should not be the first step. I think it's, as a colleague of mine put it, it's progress over perfection. Progress over perfection, I think, is putting it pretty well. I think it's important to act and start somewhere, right? Like, if you're concerned about the climate, and I think it's look for partners that are like-minded, look for suppliers that share that passion, that have products or solutions that lower your carbon footprint no matter what, right? I think you don't have to have all the numbers and check the whole balance figured out. You can already use material that's carbon friendly, carbon neutral. And I think there you can really make a great start. We've been discussing sustainability, carbon neutral with many partners, brands, and I see some brands that are very bold and go all in and really make bold choices. And I see some people still trying to first figure out, get the numbers right, see where they stand before making some bolder decisions. And I just urge everybody to feel free, take some early choices, be an early adopter, and then you do the number crunching in parallel.
Thank you. Lewis, would you like to add some last comments before I jump over to attendees' questions?
Yeah, absolutely. And without being an advertisement for my own work, I will say I think it's to get into collective action, because so much of this work we don't need to do alone. And I think it's great that a lot of companies have set out on their own initiatives early on. But if we are sharing materials, if we are sharing suppliers, which we are as an industry, then this is the time to really look at where greater efficiencies and speed can be applied. And so when it makes sense, let's approach these in collective action. So I think number one is knowing your footprint, which I think the last decade of work around the industry has been really around the transparency of who's making our stuff. And now that we know that, it's really around organizing the key programs and interventions and addressing the key hotspots as a group. So my invitation to those who are interested in getting ready to ramp up their goal 13 is to really look at the key organizations or programs that are out there that are bringing brands and retailers and suppliers together to work on this as a group in collective action.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to jump over to the attendees' questions. And Jad, I see that there's a couple for you. So for my first question, I'm actually going to put this to Florian and then Lewis, if you don't mind. So here we've got, what impact has COVID had on your development? Florian, do you want to start?
I'd say very little, because even throughout the crisis, we said we don't want to cut back on on our product development. So we did. Many of us were, of course, locked down, were in home office, and even our R&D colleagues, everybody was sent home for an extended period of time. But we took the very conscious decision that we will not stop any of our sustainability developments. And also the carbon neutral, the carbon zero tensile fiber was a product that has been developed all the way through the quarantine, all the way through the lockdown, actually. And I think this was the right thing to do, and not cut short on those things.
Lewis?
Yes, and in the case of our work, it certainly impacted the fact that orders were being canceled, that certain facilities were shut down due to COVID exposure and/or risk. Our programs had to pause, and so we definitely looked at new ways in which we could actually, once manufacturing was resuming, how could we deploy our programs in a way that was most safe, and also could lean on certain digital assets or online learning in order to reach out, so that our in-person meetings might obviously become virtual, which is what we're all doing. But how do you do that in a manufacturing setting and deliver some of these key key programs. And so I think it's impacted us by getting us smarter, leaner, and more wise about how we're approaching it. And now that manufacturing is resuming, the demand for our programs has really begun to ramp up over the last few months. And so that's great news as well.
Thank you. All right, Jad, the spotlight is going on you for these two upcoming questions. Allbirds is a leading brand, but where was your inspiration, and did you look outside the industry?
Yeah, well, the inspiration really came from one of our two co-founders. The core product came from one of our two co-founders. So Tim Brown was a professional footballer, or as we call him, soccer player in New Zealand, and took his team to the World Cup in South Africa in 2010. So he had a lot of success on the football field, but he was also a design major and was surrounded by the best technology in footwear, and noticed a couple things. One was he felt most of the innovation was going into the performance element to the performance category of footwear, and didn't feel that there was a lot of innovation going on in the casual shoes. If you look at some of the classic casual shoes out there, most of them haven't really changed for decades. And the ones that really support kind of the foundation of some of the big incumbent brands. And so one was lack of innovation in casual footwear. The other one was he's from New Zealand, and it's a country of 6 million people surrounded by 30 million sheep. And he said, why aren't people using merino wool in casual shoes? So that together, and then he met our other co-founder, Joey Zwillinger, who brought in kind of a broader sustainability focus and said, hey, the world, this isn't just a fun product to make. The world needs better products like this. It's not just more stuff. And once they kind of saw that unlock and said, you know what, this isn't just a fun product to make, this is actually something important for the world. And we said it's going to be a lot more than wool, it's going to be a lot more than shoes. And as you heard me describe, very quickly thereafter, we launched our tree products in partnership with Lensing based on Tensile lyocell, and we haven't stopped there. So that was the inspiration. And yeah, absolutely, for a very long time, we like to say we're proudly naive. We have a mix of folks with zero footwear experience, and then a smaller number, but very important number of very experienced folks that help make all of our kind of ridiculous ideas turn into something that people can actually wear and we can actually sell. So it's a combination of experience and naivete is our magic mixture.
Thank you. And another question here has come in for you. What do you do at the end of life with the shoes? I assume they cannot be composted.
Yeah, great call. That's true. So there's the challenge with footwear is, even though we base the shoes off of natural fibers, which themselves are biodegradable, we don't market them as biodegradable because the shoe is a whole combination of other materials. And so we want to talk about, we want to focus on what's realistic for customers. And until there's a realistic way for that to find itself back into a loop that doesn't add more carbon by air shipping it back somewhere, we don't feel like that's the right thing to focus on. So what we've done, going back to what I talked about in the beginning, is we said, okay, we're working on all these initiatives, but how do we prioritize? So we absolutely are working on how do we take our shoes and turn those back into value-added products without, this is a key, without adding more carbon in order to do so, right? You always want to keep an eye on that. And unfortunately, some of the kind of flashier programs that might feel good from a consumer perspective that have launched in the last few years, if you actually track the carbon, they're adding a lot of carbon in order to do that. But doesn't mean it always has to be that way, but that's one of the things we watch now. But we use the life cycle analysis to say, where can we work on, what can we control, and what needs to be controlled? Where is most of the carbon coming from? And again, as interesting as end of life can be, for shoes, if you have not started focusing on your starting materials, then you're ignoring the biggest impact area. And so again, we're not saying ignore any of these areas, but for us, when we prioritize, making sure we're starting with the lowest carbon materials we can has a dramatically bigger effect than what you're doing at the end of life. So it can be 60–70% of the carbon footprint versus low single digits. And so we use, so we implore people, make sure you're really looking at that starting starting point before you focus all of your attention at the end. All of it's important, but we think it's really important to prioritize and be honest about the math, the numbers, and the science.
Thank you so much. Now, this is a question I actually think we'd love to hear from all your perspectives, but I'm going to start with you, Florian. Where do you see sustainability in textiles in 5 to 10 years' time? What are your future hopes if we achieve carbon zero, etc., across the board? And I know that's a complex question, and I know you don't have a little ball to tell us what's going to happen, but just give us some insight here.
Yeah, I think if we have to imagine the perfect, sort of the perfect product, the perfect application, whether it's the perfect shoe or I think it would be a carbon neutral product that is also 100% circular, ideally, right? So it would really would be this waste-free, carbon-free, waste-free industry where we, where we don't do much harm to the planet. I think that's the long-term goal, and we as Lenzing, we've started actually with a circular product also. Some of you may know this Tencel Refibra, where we actually use cotton rag pulp, pre and post consumer waste. And that's also for us as Lenzing, one of the targets to also move that up. It's now a small part of our product portfolio, and as we reduce carbon, we want to increase the circular part. So ideally, many years down the road, we'll be at 0 carbon and 100% circular. But it's a long way to go.
Lewis?
I absolutely agree. I think that what we're now tackling around carbon, I'm the quintessential optimist. I'm going to say we're going to achieve it, and so we have to. So we will achieve that. But carbon neutral may not be within this 10 years. We know we want to get to at least within this industry at least 45% CO2 reductions in the supply chain. So then let's say we're on a great pathway to that. Other ways in which we're going to be able to lower carbon across the whole supply chain is going to involve, looking beyond just the supply chain and also looking into the value chain as a whole. And circularity is absolutely going to be that, because it addresses so many other issues beyond just the carbon. As we're moving and transitioning from a linear economy, which is what we currently are, take, make, waste, to a circular economy where everything has identified value and everything is a nutrient for a future system, then we're going to be also looking at the footprint from other metrics. So climate and carbon is one key one. Very closely related is water. And we all know that water scarcity and water availability globally is to say it's the next wave is not even appropriate. It's the current wave, but it is certainly where our attention will go, and looking at the water footprint of a product and being able to map that in a way that circularity helps to address and achieve that. Because if you have embedded water or energy in a product, you want to make sure that that product is also valued and retained. And then also other areas of social and labor issues, because addressing the environmental impact of these products is also going to draw the attention of, if we call this product good, how do we define good? And so making sure that we're looking at climate, water, chemistry, the interrelated KPIs or metrics related to those three things, but then also that these are made in a fair and equitable and just way that provides more prosperity for humanity. And I think those are the key issues that this industry will definitely be addressing and working on beyond just this 10 years.
Thank you. Jad, I dare you to find something else to add to that.
Yeah. Well, I very much agree with my panelists, and I think I also share Lewis's optimism and Florian's optimism. What we're hoping is that right now, we decided to put a carbon tax on ourselves, and we said, look, the policy is not keeping up. We're gonna tax ourselves. We're gonna offset down to net zero. Both, we're obviously measure, reduce, so we're working on insetting. We're working on our own footprint first and foremost. But along the way, we're offsetting down to net zero. And we think that should become just table stakes. We think everybody should be measuring their carbon number, trying to make it smaller, but putting it on all their products, right? It shouldn't be a mystery. It shouldn't be something that you're putting on the consumer to try to figure out for themselves, look up in a book somewhere. It doesn't really exist. So if the companies can cost out a product and they can, their suppliers can give them, hey, here's the cost breakdown of the product, then they can do a carbon number. It's not that challenging if you're tracking all of the different materials. So we think that should be something everybody should do. It should no longer be a fun differentiator, even though we're happy, we're excited to be the one launching that. But if we're still one of the only ones doing this in 5 years, I think that would be a miss, and I don't think that's going to happen. But so we want that to be just kind of the way you have to act if you're going to want to play and you're going to want to sell things. And like Lewis was saying, it's a lot more straightforward to get something like that, to get carbon to be something everyone's. It's not easy, but it's a focused, and the science is there, and we know how to do it. It's just going to take execution and forward-thinking partners like Lensing, who are helping brands, not do it all themselves, because we can measure it all, but it really relies on the materials. And if we can't work with the partners on the materials to get that inherent footprint down, then we're just going to be offsetting. And at some point, we got to get our inherent footprint down. But once we've done that, then I think that there's these other impact areas become something you can spend most of your focus on, because the carbon can become almost automatic as part of scoring and costing and managing like any other line item on your income statement.
Thank you so much. Another question in for all of you, and Lewis, I'd love you to start with this one, please. How do you all work with the supply chains to measure their footprint?
Yeah, great question. So there's a key tool that we're really leaning into, which is the Higg Index. And for those of you who may not know, the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, which is a sister organization of ours, was founded a decade ago by leading brands like Walmart and Patagonia, and with their material sustainability index, Nike's contributions, and now has about 250 brands and over 10,000 manufacturers who are leveraging and using their tools. And one of them is the facility module. And the facility module is being rolled out to now in verification to be able to collect data around the performance of a manufacturer within key certain environmental areas. So what our organization does is leverages the data that's being collected by that. Now, oftentimes an individual supplier or a brand may have additional LCA work or other data that we can pull in. So we're able to look at aggregating what existing data that is available, and then setting some kind of benchmark for the company. We also, as part of our initial programs, will send in engineers that are capable of taking those benchmarks as well too, and taking benchmark readings. So whether or not we're doing a high touch or a low touch, we're able to work with the data that's available and establish that baseline of carbon impact. From there, then we're able to look at sort of more of a bespoke approach to what is the appropriate intervention or programmatic disruption that might be necessary, and then be able to work with that supplier to design what programs are actually going to help them achieve their highest carbon reduction.
Thank you. Florian?
We also believe that the Higg Index is actually a great tool. I think it creates a lot of transparency. I think it's a very good tool to use. Now, for us as a fiber supplier, of course, we have to look at, we want at least a couple of steps up the value chain, so to speak. So we, when we look at our suppliers, we have first of all individual discussions with them, and we also then employ third-party, companies, agencies to help us verify those companies' carbon footprint. So we're doing LCA analysis. We've just done so. We recently updated them also for our internal use, and there we have the support of third parties that reach out to the suppliers and then make sure that we cover everything, scope 1, 2, and 3.
Thank you. Jad?
Yeah, like the guy said, Higg Index is a fundamental element for us. That's increasingly, and it's getting more and more effective at kind of catching up to novel materials. But that's one area, that it's the blessing and the curse of trying to bring new materials to customers, is you often are kind of out in front of industry benchmarks, and so you have to work with the suppliers often, and and you hope that they are part of kind of the selection of who you're going to work with. Is, I think, increasingly important of who's being really progressive about studying their own carbon footprint. if I think in the old days, sustainability 101, if a supplier said, hey, we've got this eco groovy material, fill in the blank, and there's trees on their brochure, but they don't have the numbers to back it up, that's no longer good enough. I think now one of the first questions is, great, it's a sustainable material, what's the carbon footprint? Give me the environmental metrics, kind of give me the scorecard. And so the Higg Index is one of the best ways to be able to point to that, because it's being widely adopted, as Lewis and Florian were mentioning. But making sure that we're working with suppliers who are, if they're not in the Higg Index, they're working to get in the Higg Index. And so that becomes a big part of our methodology, which we paste, which we post on our website. We also just launched a video with one of the guys from Brett McKenzie from Flight of the Conchords to explain what's in a carbon footprint, because it's pretty intuitive to understand what ocean plastic is. It's not that intuitive for most customers to understand really, carbon. It's invisible. Can you explain it to me? Where does it come from? What's good? What's a lot? What's too much? And so we've got a video to kind of simplify that. And then if for folks that really want to know, you can hunt down all the way to the methodology that shows the databases that we use. That's on our website.
Yeah, I was going to say, I always love the way that Allbirds communicates. You take into account how you can communicate this to your consumer, especially those that might just be learning. So thank you for sharing that. Lewis, I'm going to start with you on this question. What do you consider the gold standard of sustainability certifications to support climate action?
Oh, wow. Well, that's a great question. I think that the gold standard of certifications, there are so many, and it depends on the area in which you're trying to address. And so I think that if we're looking at climate and really looking at ways in which we're certifying or measuring it, we're still a little bit in some of our infancy. And I know by saying that, I'll probably get a bunch of emails of folks saying, no, our certification or our program is the one. But I think part of what we really want to do is not necessarily lean so much into expensive or private certifications, but really look at what we can agree upon as an industry as what the criteria or measurement should be. And again, I kind of like to speak back to the tools around the Sustainable Apparel Coalition and the Higg Index, because they're intended to not be sort of a for-profit engine for certification, but really there is a verification component. But looking at those tools to be able to lean better into data insights and then performance, because what we'll be able to do, whether it's at the product level, the brand level, the materials level, or the manufacturing facility level, the suite of Higg tools has modules or programs that are available to measure all of those. And as we lean more deeply into verifying that data, then what we'll have is a score whereby we can see progress. And I think one of the things that, and this is coming from someone who ran a certification program for several years, which I love. I ran the Cradle to Cradle Product Innovation Institute's Cradle to Cradle standard, and it is excellent. It is an excellent standard. So it's nothing against private labels, but I do think what's important is that we start to look at not having a multitude of labels out there, because then it becomes more about marketing and who's marketing which seal or symbol, but really looking at how we can take the whole industry across an agreed upon approach. And then if you want to use a certification scheme in order to verify that you've done this work and you want to market that to your audience because you're in an industry that is paying the most attention, or you're in a region of the world that is paying the most attention to that particular seal or certification, then I fully support that, because I think we need to look at how we can convey to our consumers that we've done the work. But behind the curtain of that, I think if we can be all leveraging similar tools, verified tools to look at common benchmarking, such as the Higg Index tools, that will be important, and improving upon them. That's the big key part too. None of these are necessarily perfect right now, and they will need to all continue to get stronger and better, and that's something we can do together.
Thank you. Now I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to go into two last questions. First one, Jad, for you. How do we educate the public in the true cost of product and encourage them to pay more for less and ultimately connect to climate action? How is value redefined?
Well, you know, our strategy from the beginning is if you're going to be approaching this problem as a business, you know, there's other ways to do it, nonprofits, et cetera. But if you're a business and you make products, you know, you need to make great products. So we always said make a great product first. And we said if we don't do that, if you don't, you know, for us, we started with comfort and design, and we said if we don't hit those two things, then how sustainable our product is going to be irrelevant because people aren't going to buy it and we're not going to make a difference. And over time, we've evolved that a little bit to say, we used to say, you know, make a great product first and then make it as sustainable as possible. Now we've said you really can't make a truly great product without making it sustainable. But we think, you know, our strategy has been to, you know, we've got a direct-to-consumer business that allows us to, you know, not live off the wholesale margin, razor-thin margin, and it allows us to invest more in our materials. So, you know, we wanted to create more room to invest in our materials, but to not have to have an exorbitant price that made it just for the, you know, outside the reach of most, just for the few. So for us, make a great product, but, you know, and have the sustainability be something that makes it better, not just something you should do. You know, we're always trying to combine what people want to do and with what they should do and have those be the same thing. And then that's really powerful. And so for instance, with the tree shoes and the tensile lyocell, you know, the fundamental key sustainable material in that shoe also makes it light and breezy. It's got that beautiful cooling sensation. It's got a great aesthetic, that slightly silky texture. You know, it's why people love the shoe, and whether or not they know how sustainable it is to begin with. So we think if you're a business, that's kind of mission number one, is make a great product, because that's where all your power lies. And then make sure that when people are choosing your product over something else, that it's better, right? Keep holding yourself to a better standard, because you know, if they're going to be buying something, you want that choice. You want them to be voting with their dollar on something that is better and keeps making incremental improvements to the overall situation.
Thank you. And Florian, I'm going to end on a quick question for you. This question could be a webinar of its own. So let's see what you can do as we wrap up. Knowing that a lot of offset programs may not be the perfect environmental solution, what offset is Lenzing using? And when will true carbon zero be available to purchase?
Indeed, that's a very good question and a very bold one. So we are partnered with Natural Capital Partners, and I think what's important is that they follow the carbon neutral protocol. So our partner really measures, you know, what's the footprint today, what are your reduction targets, what's the roadmap. They follow up on our initiatives, on the actions. And I think that's important. That also ties a bit back to the question that Luis was answering. I think it's really, whatever label or partner you're partnering with, I think it's really important that it's not just offsetting. So we all agree that insetting or reduction is the ultimate solution, and offsetting should just be the sort of the icing on the cake that's necessary. For us as Lenzing, depending on the sites, will take us still a few more years, several years, many years, depending on the site. But we're working hard on it, and it would be great to have one site carbon zero without offsetting as soon as possible. That's our next mission.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you to all three of you for participating in today's webinar, and a special thank you to Anne-Marie. A recording will be made available shortly and emailed to all attendees. I would also like to give recognition to Lenzing for their sponsorship and their leadership in textile sustainability. Lenzing has embarked on a journey to zero carbon tensile fibers with the launch of the True Carbon Zero campaign. Through reduction, compensation, and collaboration with suppliers and customers, Lenzing is committed to offering the first certified carbon neutral wood-based fibers on the market. Please feel free to contact Lenzing at newyork@lenzing.com for more information about this exciting program. And I'd like to also add that USFIA will host another webinar on September 29th with an in-depth explanation about the True Carbon Zero, which you can register for at usfashionindustry.com. Thank you all again for joining us, and have a great Climate Week NYC.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us. Thanks everybody for joining in.